Amara Chukwu fell asleep in the wrong car at 4:47 in the morning on the third basement level of a parking garage in Gangnam, with her badge still clipped to her scrubs and a small orange inhaler shut inside her fist. She had meant to find the gray sedan her carpool used on double shift nights. She found a black one instead. Doors already open for a man who was still upstairs signing something he didn't want his name on. She sat down to rest her eyes. Rest became sleep. Sleep became a woman curled against tinted glass, breathing slow, her fist never loosening around the inhaler, as if even unconscious she was still on duty for someone else. Cha Yun-ho stopped 3 feet from his own car door and did not move again for 11 seconds. His driver reached for his radio. "Sir, I'll have security, don't," Yun-ho said. It was not a question. It was not the trespassing that stopped him. Men had tried worse things against that car and regretted it inside a minute. It was not her shoes, scuffed white at the toe from 1,000 miles of hospital floor. It was not even her face, slack and unguarded in a way faces around him never were. It was the fist. Closed tight around something small, in her sleep, the way a person holds the one thing they cannot afford to lose. He would not understand for 6 more days why that grip made his chest hurt like an old bruise someone had pressed on purpose. Let me take you back to where this started. 3 days earlier, Amara counted the money in the Milo tin twice, because the number never got better the first time she counted it. 127,001, folded into fifths and rubber banded by denomination, the way her father used to fold his own pay before he stopped needing to. The nebulizer at the pharmacy on Nanyang Road cost 340,000. David's rescue inhaler bought them time, not peace, and peace was what she was saving for, one double shift at a time. "Mommy, is it enough yet?" David asked from the doorway, 6 years old and already good at reading tens. "Not yet, baby," she kissed the top of his head, "but it's more than yesterday." That's how it works. She worked nights at Yoksam General, agency contracted through Hanaro Staffing Partners, which had cut the night differential 8 months ago in a memo that used the word restructuring 11 times and the word sorry not at all. She picked up every extra shift the schedule would give her, because the difference between enough and not enough for a 6-year-old with asthma was measured in individual shifts, not in feelings. Her supervisor, a tired man named Mr. Song, who liked her because she never called in sick and never complained where he could hear it, had offered her the double that Tuesday like he was doing her a favor. It was a favor. That was the terrible part. Her best friend Ijeoma called at 6, Lagos loud even through a Seoul phone line. "You're doing 16 hours again." "I'm doing what pays," Amara said, tucking the tin into her bag between her stethoscope and a folded photograph of her father in his good church shirt. "Amara, your body is not a bank. It's the only one that gives me interest," Amara said. And Ijeoma laughed the way she always did when Amara made a joke instead of crying, which both of them understood was the same thing wearing different clothes. Across the river, in a glass tower with his name nowhere on it, because his name did not need to be, Cha Yun-ho sat at the head of a table of men twice his age who called him young and meant it as a threat. The Cha Group's public face was concrete and steel, bridges, apartment towers, a listing on the exchange 3 weeks away that would make the family legitimate on paper for the first time in 2 generations. Its other face collected debts the banks wouldn't touch. In a building 6 blocks from the hospital where a nurse named Amara Chukwu was, at that exact hour, changing a dressing with hands too steady for how tired she was. The board wants the Hanaro file closed before the listing, his uncle Cha Engine said, sliding a folder across glass. Old accounts. Write them off. Clean books photograph well. Which accounts? Yunho said, not touching the folder. Does it matter? Engine's smile had never once reached above his mouth. Sentiment is expensive, Yunho-ya. The market does not pay for it. Yunho did not open the folder that night. He had a rule, one his grandmother had given him before she gave him anything else: never sign what you have not read twice. He set it on the corner of his desk, unopened, and went down to his car at 4:40 in the morning because sleep had stopped coming easily to him somewhere around the time his father did. That was where the story catches up to the woman already asleep in his back seat, and where it keeps going past her. He did not wake her right away. He stood in the cold with his driver watching him with an expression Jung Tae-ho had learned in 9 years to keep off his face and mostly succeeded. Sir, Tae-ho tried again. I can call it in. Garage security will. She's a nurse, Yunho said, nodding at the badge clipped crooked to her scrubs. Yoksum General, A. Chukwu Run, she's asleep in your car. I noticed. He crouched, one hand on the door frame, close enough to see the inhaler in her fist and the tin corner poking from her open bag, close enough to read, without meaning to, a folded pay stub tucked in the same pocket. 211,001, 1 week's wages, itemized down to a deduction line he recognized because his own company had written the policy that created it. He did not know that yet. He only knew that watching a stranger sleep should not have felt like watching his mother come home at 5 in the morning, smelling of other people's houses, setting her shoes by the door so the sound wouldn't wake him, failing anyway because he was always awake, waiting to make sure she'd made it back. Take the long way to the garage exit, he told Tae-ho, straightening. Let her sleep another 20 minutes. Then wake her gently and tell her which floor she's on. Nothing else. Tae-ho studied him. And if she asks whose car this is? Yunho looked back once through the tinted glass at the woman who had no idea, yet, that she was sleeping in the car of the most feared man south of the river. And who would have been, if she'd known, entirely unimpressed. Tell her it doesn't matter, he said. Tell her to get home safe. The 2 worlds did not touch again that night, only nearly, the way 2 trains pass close enough on parallel tracks that a passenger in one can for half a second see a stranger's face in the other and wonder who they are. Amara woke at 5:03 to a soft-spoken driver telling her, without judgment, that she was 2 floors below her carpool. She apologized 11 times walking to the stairwell. She did not look back at the car. She had no reason to. She had a son at home who needed his mother more than she needed to know whose door she'd borrowed for 20 minutes of sleep, and a tin with 127,001 in it that would not fill itself while she stood around wondering about strangers' cars. Yunho watched the stairwell door close behind her from the back seat and told himself it meant nothing, the way men tell themselves a great many things right before those things become the whole shape of their lives. He did not open his uncle's folder that night either. But he did, before he slept, ask young Teho to find out, quietly, which nurse from Yoksam General had been assigned that week to his grandmother's private care request. A request his grandmother had made a week earlier and he had ignored. The way he ignored most things that weren't a deal or a debt. He had a feeling, one he would not name for 6 more days, that the two things were about to stop being separate. He was right. It would take exactly that long, and it would begin the following Thursday when a garage security guard named Mr. Hahn, who had seen the whole thing and said nothing to anyone, watched the same nurse walk past his booth again and thought, not for the first time, that some people carried the whole weight of a family on shoulders too narrow for the job and did it anyway, every single night, for no thanks at all. Yoksam General ran 3 floors of general medicine and 1 floor, the 4th, that existed mostly on paper, a private convalescent wing that hospital administrators spoke of the way junior staff speak of a room they've never been allowed inside. Amara had worked 2 years without setting foot on it. She set foot on it that Thursday because her supervisor, Mr. Song, caught her at the nurse's station with a clipboard and an apology already loaded in his voice. Special placement, he said. Private client wants a night nurse with respiratory experience. Pays double the agency rate. I thought of you. Who's the client? An elderly woman. Family's private, very private. He lowered his voice the way people did when private meant something more specific than private. The family is Cha. Amara had heard the name the way most of Seoul had heard the name, sideways, in half sentences, in the particular silence that fell over a room when someone said it directly. She thought of the 10. Double rate meant the nebulizer by next week instead of next month. I'll take it, she said, and did not ask a second question. Because in her experience, the people who could afford to pay double the rate could also afford to make life difficult for a nurse who asked too many. The Cha residence was not a house so much as a fortress with good manners, high walls, a garden laid out like a chessboard, staff who moved without sound and watched without seeming to. Amara was met at the door not by the family, but by a woman in her 70s with silver hair pinned in a style 30 years out of fashion and eyes that missed nothing, sitting upright in a chair by the window like she'd been carved there. You're smaller than I expected, the woman said in careful, deliberate English, the kind a person uses when they want a stranger to know they're trying. I get that a lot, Amara said. You must be Mrs. O. Grandmother O, if you're any good. Mrs. O, if you're not. A pause, a flicker at the corner of her mouth. We'll see which one you are. Amara liked her immediately, the way she liked patients who tested her on purpose, because the ones who tested you were usually the ones who'd been failed by people who didn't. She checked vitals, adjusted the oxygen line, noted a slight wheeze that the previous nurse's chart hadn't flagged, and said so, plainly, without softening it into a suggestion. Grandmother O watched her do all of it with the flat attention of someone conducting an interview neither of them had agreed to. My grandson hired you, she said, though I doubt he remembers doing it. He signs things his assistant puts in front of him. Then I should thank the assistant. You should thank no one. You should simply be paid what you're worth, which this family has historically been bad at determining. She said it lightly, but something under it wasn't light at all, and Amara filed it away the way she filed everything a patient's family let slip without meaning to. Useful later, in a way she couldn't yet name. She met him for the first time properly 2 nights later in the hallway outside his grandmother's room at 1:15 in the morning, both of them startled into stillness by the other's presence. He was in shirt sleeves, tie gone, looking less like the man the city whispered about and more like someone who hadn't slept through a night in longer than he could say. She recognized nothing about him. He recognized everything about her and said none of it. "You're the new nurse," he said, Amara Chukwu. She did not offer her hand. Her hands were full of a water pitcher and a chart. "You're the grandson who signs things without reading them, I hear." Something moved behind his eyes, quick and unguarded, gone before it fully arrived. "She told you that." "She told me a lot of things. I'm a good listener." "It's in the job description, right under changing dressings and being underpaid." "You're not underpaid here." "No," Amara agreed. "Here, I'm paid exactly what I negotiated, which is a different thing entirely and rarer than you'd think." She moved past him toward the room, and he stepped aside to let her, and neither of them said anything else, but he stood in that hallway a long moment after her door had clicked shut, turning over the particular sensation of having been handled, gently and completely, by a woman half his height and entirely unimpressed by his name. Jung Tae-ho found him there 10 minutes later and asked no questions, though he made a note, the kind he'd learned to make over 9 years of watching a man who did not do this. The negotiation happened the following week, in the sitting room off the kitchen, because Amara did not negotiate in front of the patient and Yoon-ho, to his own mild surprise. Respected that instinct enough not to argue with it. He had come prepared to offer more than the placement fee, a car, a driver, an apartment closer to the compound, the sort of things his world offered when it wanted something handled quickly. "I don't need a car," Amara said. "It would make the commute. I don't need a car," she said again, evenly. "I need 3 things. I keep my shifts at Yoksam. I'm not giving up my patients there because your family can pay more. I keep my son's school schedule. I pick him up myself on Tuesdays and Thursdays, no exceptions. And this ends the day I say it ends, not the day it's convenient for your family. Those are the terms. If they don't work, I'll recommend someone else for your grandmother. And there won't be hard feelings on my end." He looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look Jung Tae-ho would later describe to no one as the look of a man doing arithmetic he didn't recognize the shape of. "Those terms are acceptable," Yoon-ho said. "Good," she stood to go, then paused at the door, because something in her would not let the moment pass uncommented. "For what it's worth, most people in your position lead with the car. You didn't lead with the car. Should I have?" "No," she said. "That's why I said yes." She left him there, turning the sentence over the way he turned over ledgers, looking for the trick in it, and finding, to his own quiet unease, that there wasn't one. Ijeoma, on the phone that night, was less impressed with the arithmetic and more concerned with the arithmetic's employer. "Cha," she repeated, as in the cha you hear about when the electricity goes out somewhere it shouldn't and nobody asks why. "I'm nursing his grandmother Iye, not marrying into a cartel. I'm just saying, be careful with men who own the ground under their own feet. They forget other people are standing on it too." Amara didn't answer that right away, because some nights the tin was still short by 200,000 won, and some truths were more expensive to sit with than others. "I hear you," she said finally. "I've got terms. I've got an exit. I'll be fine." She believed it, Mostly, the way people believe the things they've decided to believe because the alternative is exhausting. She did not yet know that Cha Yun-ho had spent that same evening finally opening his uncle's folder, the one marked Hanaro Legacy Accounts, and had not yet reached the page with her father's name on it, though he would within the week. And the belief she was building so carefully that this was a job, negotiated cleanly, contained entirely on her own terms, was about to be tested by something neither of them had chosen and both of them would have to answer for. The kitchen at the Cha compound had never, in Jung Taeho's 9 years of employment, smelled like anything but the careful, expensive nothing of a house run by staff too professional to leave fingerprints. It smelled, on the second Sunday of Amara's placement, like palm oil and thyme and something bright and citrus sharp that made two of the kitchen staff wander in under the pretense of checking the pantry. Jollof, Amara said, without looking up from the pot. And before you ask, no, I won't apologize for the smell. Your grandmother asked what I eat at home. I decided to show her instead of describing it badly. Grandmother O sat at the counter on a stool she had no medical business sitting on, sleeves pushed up, peeling ginger with more precision than her doctor would have liked. It smells like something with a story, she said. Everything I cook has a story. My father used to say a pot without a story is just hot water with ambition. Amara tasted the sauce, adjusted, tasted again. This one's my grandmother's. She'd double the pepper and call anyone who complained soft. I like her already. Everyone does. She's dead 11 years, and people still ask after her before they ask after me. Yoon-ho came in for water and stayed for 40 minutes, which Jung Tae-ho, watching from the doorway with an expression he'd once again failed to fully suppress, would later note as a fact worth recording. Yoon-ho did not cook. He did not, as a rule, sit in his own kitchen. He sat on the counter's far stool, arms crossed, and watched a woman half his height run his grandmother's kitchen like she'd been born knowing where everything belonged, which, in a way she couldn't have explained, she had. You don't measure anything, he said. Measuring is for people who don't trust their hands yet. That sounds like something you tell people to sound wise. It sounds like something my grandmother told me, and she was never wrong, so I kept saying it. She caught him almost smiling and pointed the wooden spoon at him like evidence. There, you did the thing. I didn't do a thing. You did. It's fine. I won't tell anyone the terrifying Cha Yun-ho almost smiled over a pot of rice. She turned back to the stove, missing the fact that he actually did smile then, fully, briefly, in a kitchen that hadn't seen one in longer than the staff could remember. Later, at the table, Grandmother O spoke to her housekeeper in rapid Korean, low and clearly meant to stay inside the room, a complaint about the ginger, a joke about her grandson's stubbornness, an aside about whether the new nurse's rice needed salt. Amara answered the salt question in Korean, quietly, without looking up, in an accent careful and unpolished, but entirely correct. The room went silent for exactly 2 seconds. You understand Korean, Yoon-ho said. I understand more than I speak. I learn languages by listening in rooms where people forget I'm there. It's useful. She met his eyes without apology. It's not a trick. It's homework. 6 years of night classes, 1 hour before my shift, most days. You let my grandmother talk about you in a language she assumed you didn't have. She wasn't cruel. If she had been, I'd have let her know I understood a lot sooner. Amara shrugged, unbothered. The shrug of a woman who had made peace long ago with being underestimated by rooms that would eventually have to recalculate. People show you who they are when they think you can't understand them. It's the most honest test there is. Grandmother O, delighted rather than embarrassed, reached across and patted Amara's hand with the particular approval of a woman who did not hand it out freely. She's sharper than the last three you brought me, she told her grandson in English, deliberately now, so there could be no mistaking it. Keep this one around. He meant to say something dismissive. What came out instead, quiet enough that only Amara caught it, was, I intend to, and he left the kitchen before either of them could examine what he'd meant by it, because he did not yet know himself, and the not knowing was starting to feel less like confusion and more like a door standing open that he had not decided whether to walk through. That same night, long after the house had gone quiet, Yoon-ho sat at his desk with the Hanaro folder open under the lamp, the one he had promised himself he would finally finish reading. Page after page of case files, names and dates and collection notes in the flat, bloodless language his father's people had always used for cruelty, asset review, escalated contact, resolved by attrition. He was 3/4 through when a name stopped him the way names sometimes do, arriving in the eye a full second before the mind catches up. Chukwu Emmanuel, case opened 11 years ago. Original loan, medical emergency, spousal surgery. Balance at default, 12,400,001. Escalation approved and signed. In a hand he recognized instantly because it was younger and shakier, but unmistakably his own. Cha Yoon-ho, authorized, junior officer. He had been 24. His father had handed him the file to prove he could be trusted with the family's real business, the business under the business, and he had signed it the way a young man signs things when he is more afraid of disappointing his father than of what the signature will do to a stranger. He remembered nothing about the case itself. He remembered everything about the fear that made him sign it without reading past the first page. Beneath the escalation note, in a different hand, someone had added a final line 8 months later, subject deceased, industrial accident, overtime shift, account closed, unrecovered. Yoon-ho sat very still for a long time. Then he pulled his phone toward him and typed Amara Chukwu's full name into the compound's personnel file and found, in the emergency contact history from her hiring paperwork, the words he had already known, in the sick, falling way a man knows a thing his whole body has been bracing for, Father Emmanuel Chukwu, deceased. He set the folder down very carefully. The way a person sets down something that might otherwise be thrown across the room, and did not sleep at all that night, turning over again and again, the fact that the woman singing over his grandmother's stove, the woman whose almost smile he'd been chasing without naming it, was standing in his house because of a signature he'd put his own name to a lifetime, and 12,400,001 ago. He did not tell her. That was the decision made in the dark that he would spend the rest of the story paying for. He told himself it was timing, the listing 3 weeks out, his uncle circling, a truth that large deserved a better moment than a Tuesday at 2 a.m. He told Jung Tae-ho only that the Hanaro file needed a full audit, quietly, no board notification, starting with every account from that period. He told his grandmother nothing, though she watched him more closely after that night, The way she'd watched him as a boy right before he did something he'd regret and couldn't yet name. And he told Amara nothing at all, which meant that when she came down the next morning and found him standing at the window with a look she couldn't place, she assumed it was business, because it never occurred to her that a man who owned that much of the city could be standing perfectly still under the weight of her own dead father's name, 3 floors above her head, in a folder he had not yet found the courage to close. The council that governed the parts of the Cha group that never appeared on the exchange listing met on the 9th floor, in a room with no windows, which Amara noted the one time she passed its door and thought nothing further of. Cha in June sat at its head that week with the particular satisfaction of a man who has found a lever. The listing is in 9 days, he told the room, and then to Yoonho directly 9 days, and my nephew is spending his nights in the kitchen with the help. She's my grandmother's nurse. She's a foreign woman with a dead father whose case file you personally pulled from legal at midnight, Injun said, mild as milk, and let the silence do the rest of the work. I have people too, Yoonho ya. I simply use them for different things than you do. He slid a single photograph across the table, Amara and Yoonho in the kitchen doorway, her hand on his arm from steadying herself on a wet floor, nothing more, caught from an angle that made it look like everything. The board is calling this a brand risk conversation. I'm calling it a mercy that I found it before the papers did. Don't touch her, Yoonho said, and the room went the particular kind of quiet that happened when everyone present understood a line had just been drawn in language plain enough that no euphemism could later blur it. Injun only smiled. I wouldn't dream of it. I'll simply let the story tell itself. Stories have a way of doing that once they're loose. The story loosened 4 days later. Amara heard it first from Ijeoma, breathless and furious down the phone line, reading headlines off a gossip outlet in a voice that shook. Nurse or negotiator? The woman, close to the Cha heir, in the family debt she never mentioned. The article was thin on facts and thick on implication, but it had one fact exactly right. The one fact that broke something loose in Amara's chest, her father's name, her father's debt, 12,400,000 won, and a note that the collection order had been personally authorized by a Cha family officer, no name given, timeline conveniently vague. She read it standing in the compound's hallway with her coat still on, and something in her went very still and very cold in a way that had nothing to do with the article and everything to do with the sentence forming underneath it. Unstoppable once it started, he had access to every file in that building. He had pulled Hanaro's records himself. Grandmother O had said so at dinner, proudly, not knowing what she was handing her. He had known. She did not need to ask him to know that he had known and had said nothing, for as long as she had been singing in his kitchen and teaching his grandmother pepper soup and letting herself, foolishly, believe that being seen accurately by someone was the same thing as being told the truth by them. She found him in his study. She did not raise her voice. That was the part he would not be able to stop hearing for a long time afterward. You knew, she said. He did not insult her by pretending otherwise. 11 days, he said. I found it 11 days ago. 11 days. She let the number sit in the room the way she let every number sit, because numbers didn't lie, even when people did. You signed the order that killed my father when you were 24 years old, and you found that file 11 days ago, and you let me cook in your kitchen and teach your grandmother my grandmother's recipes and stand there while your uncle photographed us like it was something to be ashamed of, and you said nothing. I was going to tell you when. One word, flat, final, after the listing, after your uncle did it for you, in a headline with my father's name spelled wrong. Amara, don't. She held up a hand, not raised, not dramatic, simply final. I negotiated terms with you because I thought I understood exactly what I was standing in. Turns out, I was standing in the middle of something you built, and you let me believe I'd walked in on my own. She was already reaching for her coat, already folding the last of her composure around herself like a coat of her own. I'm not going to scream at you. It won't change the signature. It won't bring him back. I'm just going to go home to my son, and I'm not coming back until I decide there's a reason to. She did not slam the door. That was the part he could not stop hearing. The house went quiet after her, in a way it had never gone quiet before, not even during the years his mother spent dying in a hospital bed 2 floors above where his grandmother now sat asking, every night for a week, whether the nurse was coming back and receiving no answer that satisfied her. Jung Tae-ho found his employer 3 days later still in the same chair. The Hanaro folder opened to the same page, the coffee beside him gone cold enough to have a skin on it. Sir, Tae-ho said, carefully, the board meets in 6 days. I know what the board does in 6 days. Your uncle is telling them the story is contained. That the situation resolved itself. Tae-ho hesitated and then did something he had not done in 9 years of employment, which was speak past his job description. It didn't resolve itself. It ended because you let it. I've watched you close deals worth 40 times what that debt was worth without blinking. You didn't blink for her either. You just let her walk. What was I supposed to do, Tae-ho? Give her money? She'd have thrown it back at me. She told me herself, no charity. There's nothing I can hand her that fixes what my name already did to hers. Then don't hand her something, Tae-ho said. Fix the thing your name did, not for her. So it stops being true. He set a second folder on the desk, thinner than the first. I pulled the rest of the Hanaro legacy accounts while you were sitting here. There are 41 of them, families like hers, debts collected the same way, under the same policy, some of them still being garnished today. You have 6 days before the listing makes it very hard to do anything about any of it without the whole market watching. Yoon-ho looked at the folder for a long moment. Then, for the first time since the night he'd found her father's name, he picked up a pen and began finally to read every page twice. The board convened on the 9th floor room with no windows 4 days before the listing, and Cha and June arrived expecting a formality, the write-off he'd requested weeks earlier, quietly approved. The story already fading from the feeds it had briefly occupied. What he got instead was his nephew standing at the head of the table with the full Hanaro legacy file spread open for every director to see, and a number already typed at the bottom of a proposal none of them had authorized. I'm forgiving 41 accounts, Yoon-ho said. Effective today. Total value 4 billion, 200 million won. I'm also dissolving Hanaro's collection division and folding its remaining functions under legal, with oversight from an outside compliance office starting this quarter. The room erupted in the particular controlled fury of men who had spent decades learning never to raise their voices. The listing is in 4 days, one director said. You cannot announce a 4 billion write-off 4 days before we go public. The underwriters will ask questions, Yoon-ho agreed. I'll answer them. All of them, including the one about a case file with my signature on it from 11 years ago on an account belonging to a man named Emmanuel Chukwu, who died working 3 jobs to pay off a debt my company should never have escalated the way it did. He let that land, watching his uncle's face for the first time, not with deference, but with something closer to contempt. You called it a brand risk conversation, Uncle. I'm calling it what it actually is, a correction. Long overdue, and it's happening whether the board approves it or not, because I own the controlling share, and I finally decided to read what I sign. You'll cost this family the listing. I might. I'd rather cost the family a listing than keep profiting from a policy that buried a man for missing a payment on his wife's surgery. He closed the folder. You can vote against it. It won't change the outcome. It will change whether history remembers you as the man who tried to stop it. The vote was 7-4 in his favor, which surprised no one more than in June, who had spent 30 years assuming that money always, eventually, voted for itself. It did not, this time, and by the time the story broke publicly, Yoon-ho releasing it himself, ahead of the underwriters, ahead of any outlet that might have shaped it uglier, the headline read differently than the one that had driven Amara out his door. Cha Air forgives billions in legacy debt, cites family's correction ahead of listing. The listing proceeded 3 days later at a lower valuation than projected, which the market absorbed the way markets absorb most things, by moving on. Amara read the story at her kitchen table with David asleep in the next room and the tin, now holding 280,000 won, sitting between her elbows like a witness. Ijayoma had sent the article with no commentary, which was its own kind of commentary. Amara read it 3 times. She noted that her father's name was spelled correctly this time. She noted that Yoon-ho had not once, anywhere in the coverage, mentioned her, not her name, not her presence in his house, not the fight that had sent her out his door 3 weeks earlier. He had not used her as the reason. He had simply done the thing that was right, publicly, expensively, without asking her to watch him do it or thank him for it. That was the detail that undid something in her that the headline alone had not touched. Grandmother owes approval, her own suspicion of him. Even his silence about the file, all of it had been complicated in ways she was still sorting through. But a man who paid a cost that large without once trying to collect credit for it from the one person who might have owed him gratitude for it, that was not the same man who had signed a form at 24 out of fear of his father. She sat with that for a long time, the tin between her elbows, David's breathing steady and even through the wall, and did not decide anything that night. But she stopped, for the first time in 3 weeks, being entirely certain that the door was closed. She called him on a Thursday at 1:15 in the morning, the same hour they had first properly met in his grandmother's hallway, which she noticed and did not mention. "I'm not coming back as your grandmother's nurse," she said, when he answered on the first ring like he'd been waiting by the phone for 3 weeks, which he had. "That job's over. I've got a new one starting Monday, running intake at a community clinic in Guro. Lower pay, better hours, and nobody there is going to photograph me for standing too close to anyone. Congratulations," he said, and meant it. and she could hear that he meant it, which was new. I'm calling because I want to say one thing, and then you can decide what you do with it. She looked at the tin on her counter, closed her hand briefly around David's inhaler beside it, the same one he'd been holding the night she fell asleep in the wrong car. The story neither of them had spoken about since. You should have told me the day you found that file. Not 11 days later. Not after your uncle made the choice for you. I needed the truth from you before I needed the correction from you. Those aren't the same gift. I know, he said. I've had 3 weeks to know it properly. Good. Then here are my terms if there's going to be a version of this that isn't over. Her voice was steady, the voice of a woman who negotiated for a living and had never once, in her life, let a man set the terms of her own story. 1 dinner. Just 1. And I keep the clinic, the job I found on my own, not one you hand me. And if you ever find something about my life buried in one of your files again, you tell me the same day. Not 11 days later, not never, the same day. 1 dinner, he repeated. Those terms are acceptable. They'd better be. I don't offer many rounds of negotiation. But there was warmth under it now, the kind that hadn't been there the day she walked out, and he heard it. And something in his chest finally, fully unclenched for the first time since he'd read her father's name under a desk lamp at 2 a.m. They had dinner on a Friday at a small table in a restaurant with no sign, chosen not because it was quiet, but because it was hers to choose. She'd picked it. A Nigerian place 2 subway stops from her new clinic, run by a woman from Enugu who called Amara's sister and eyed Yunho with open, unhurried suspicion until he ordered in careful, badly pronounced Igbo he'd clearly practiced. And the whole kitchen laughed, and something in the room went soft. You practiced that, Amara said. I practiced several things. I'm told I only get 1 dinner. I intended to use it well. You're not as terrifying as the city thinks. Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation to protect. Your secret's safe. I only tell the truth about the people who've earned it. She said it lightly, but he heard the weight underneath, the sentence she'd been building toward across an entire dinner. You're the first person who ever asked what I thought instead of telling me what I was, even before the file, before any of it. In that hallway that first night, you asked my name instead of assuming you already knew who I'd be. You corrected my grandmother's chart before you'd been in the house an hour. It seemed important to find out who you actually were. He set down his glass, and something in his face went unguarded, the way it had once, briefly, over a pot of rice, except this time he let it stay. I have never once in my life wanted to know a person as much as I wanted to know you, and I still nearly lost that because I was afraid of what the truth would cost me. I won't make that mistake again. Not with you. That's a big promise for 1 dinner. I'm told you don't offer many rounds of negotiation. She laughed, really laughed, unguarded. The sound Jung Tae-ho would later tell his wife he'd never once heard the boss's face produce a reason for before that year, and reached across the small table, and Yoon-ho took her hand like it was the most important document he'd ever signed, and this time he'd read every line of it twice. The first kiss came after, on the sidewalk outside, gentle and unhurried, the kind that asks a question and waits, genuinely, for the answer. And Amara gave it standing, on her own 2 feet, on a street she'd chosen. in a night that belonged, finally and completely, to her. 6 months later, the Emmanuel Chukwu Community Clinic opened its doors in Guro with a modest plaque by the entrance and a line of patients around the block before 9 in the morning. Amara ran intake herself most days, in scrubs she'd chosen, on hours she'd negotiated, answering to a board that included exactly one person from the Cha family, listed not as a donor, but as a volunteer driver for patients who couldn't make the trip alone. Grandmother O had insisted on the seat. She'd also insisted, over Amara's objection, on funding the clinic's first year outright, though she'd done it the way she did most things, sideways and unstoppable, through a foundation that bore her late daughter's name, O Sunhee, so that the money arrived looking like history correcting itself rather than a rich family buying its way back into someone's good graces. Amara had studied the paperwork for a long time before signing. "This isn't charity," Grandmother O had told her, patting her hand the way she had that first night in the kitchen. "Charity is what strangers do. This is family, deciding to be useful for once." Cha in June did not attend the opening. He had resigned his board seat 2 months after the listing, quietly, at the family's insistence, and moved to a smaller office with a smaller title and considerably less appetite for euphemism than he'd once had. Song Hyerin, the woman the family council had once hoped Yoonho would marry, sent flowers to the clinic instead, with a note that read, simply, "Glad it worked out the way it should have, and married, that spring, a man of her own choosing," which surprised no one who'd ever actually asked her what she wanted instead of assuming it for her. David, 7 now, and thriving on a nebulizer that had, in the end, arrived not from the 10, but from his mother's first paycheck at a job she'd built herself. Liked to sit at the clinic's front desk after school and hand out stickers to smaller patients with the gravity of a boy who understood exactly how important the job was. The 10 sat in a small glass case by the clinic's entrance, empty now of coins and full, instead of a single laminated card in Amara's handwriting, even a little, counted twice, is still enough. Patients dropped spare change into a jar beside it on their way out, for the family after them who'd need it more. Yoonho came by most evenings after the clinic closed, in a car that no longer felt like a fortress to either of them, and one evening in early spring, on the walking bridge over the river with the whole lit skyline standing witness the way it always had. Indifferent and enormous, and finally, for once simply beautiful rather than lonely, he took a small box from his coat and did not kneel, because Amara had told him once, laughing, that she'd negotiate that too if he tried it in public. "I'm not asking you to be rescued," he said instead. "I know better than that now. I'm asking you to stand beside me. Same terms as always, yours, not mine." "Those terms are acceptable," Amara said, and the ring on her finger, small and specific and chosen because she'd chosen it, caught the city lights the way the 10 once had, counted and recounted, worth more than its number by the time it finally, fully belonged to her. Some debts get forgiven. The best ones get repaid by becoming something entirely new. If Amara's 10 and everything it took to fill it meant something to you tonight, I'd love to know. Would you have taken that placement job the way she did, terms firmly in hand, or walked away the moment you heard the family name, the way Ijoma begged her to? Tell me in the comments. I read every one of them. And if stories like this one, about people who get seen accurately and systems that get rebuilt by the very hands they once ground down, are the kind of thing you want more of? Stay a while and subscribe to Deck Channel _name. There's another one waiting for you already. Being seen is never the whole rescue. It's only ever the beginning of one. See you in the next story.